All right. The first thing I want to mention that I don't always do it, but this I just want to dedicate this year in memory of two people whose yahrzeit is at this point in time. One is her yahrzeit was right after Pesach, but she was a person who, when she would talk about Yom Haatzmaut, so she would actually be glowing and talking about how she celebrated Yom Haatzmaut. Was Judy Mendelson, Yehudis Rachel Bas Yosef. She was a person, she didn't have any children, she had a lot of Yisurim, but she always had an open house, she always helped everybody, children who needed help either because they were handicapped or for whatever reason needed to learn and were not able to get into the day school, whatever it was, she would always giving her time. So I felt that it would be proper to dedicate this year in her memory, as well as in the memory of Frank Borg, who, besides being a congregant of mine, was also a very close friend, Ephraim ben Moshe. This year should be, his yahrzeit happens to be on Yom Haatzmaut. I still remember when I got the call that he was in the emergency room in the hospital, running out from shul to go to the emergency room. So this year should be in their memories. Now, many years ago, I remember that there was a lot of conflict. I don't know whether this conflict still rages over the observance of the Yom Haatzmaut. It's not that everybody does or doesn't do it today, but people have other things to fight about. But the question was, why are war people, so opposed to the celebration of Yom Haatzmaut? Now, to me, the question of observing Yom Haatzmaut is not a question of saying Hallel or having a special holiday. The truth is, a person could be Zionistically oriented and recognize the Kesser that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for Klal Yisrael, the salvation that he brought for the Jewish people, especially after World War II, and at the same time say, there are special halachas when Hallel's to be said. There are those who claim that in order to say Hallel, you need a special takanas chachamim. Others say that, citing the Meiri says, Kol yachid v'yachid shira lo nes, yachal likfo osa hayom b'chol shana v'shana lomar bo es ha'halel, that any time a person has a miracle and he wants to give thanks to God, so he could designate that particular day every year to say the Hallel. There are shitos both ways, and I'm not going to find fault with either shita. But what I am concerned about is the attitude. Now, one of the reasons given for not being impressed, I should say, with the establishment of the state and not recognizing it among the chasadim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for Klal Yisrael, as some do, is that those who were in the leadership of the establishment of the state were not Torah observing, and to a certain degree may have been anti-Torah observing. And I remember my father years ago gave a shiur, actually was a speech, the Shabbos before Yom Haatzmaut. It was, this year, it was Tazriya Mitzorah. It was on the Haftarah of Mitzorah. And in the Haftarah of Mitzorah, it talks about how Assyria, the soldiers of Assyria, surrounded the Shomron, and they were and there was starvation within the city because they couldn't go out to get food, and there were 4 people who were suffering from leprosy. And as is the halacha in regard to someone who's a mitzorah, they were residing just outside the city. Some say within the gates of the city, to protect themselves from the Assyrian army on one hand, and at the other hand, they weren't allowed to be part of the city because the mitzorah had to leave the city. And who were these 4 people? These 4 people were Gehazi Uvanav. And Gehazi is used as the example of somebody who is a great sinner. And at that time, there was a miracle that took place, and as the Assyrian soldiers thought that an army was coming to attack them, and they all ran away. But the people in the city were not aware that the attacking army was no longer there. And Gehazi and his sons decided that they'll go into the Syrian camp to see what's going on. And they're the ones that brought the information over to the city that the attacking army is no longer there, and people could go out and go into the camp that was used by the attacking army, and there was lots of food there. And in a sense, they brought the salvation to the Jewish people. So you see that there could be a miracle of salvation that is brought about through people who are not identified with Torah. On the contrary. Now, and there's no doubt, of course, there are those who claim otherwise, but there is no doubt that the establishment of the state of Israel was a miracle and was a great salvation. It was a salvation for the Jewish people residing in what was Palestine at that time, because the Arabs would have massacred them. And the establishment of this state created a haven, a place of protection for Jews all over the world, a place that they finally could flee to in times that there are decrees against them. And while we know that the United States has the Statue of Liberty welcoming everybody, nevertheless, there were quota systems at that part of the 20th century that limited the amount of Jews that could come in. Earlier, in Ellis Island, every day, many Jews would come in, but limitations were later placed on it. And because of it, many Jews were not able to enter Eretz Yisrael during the years of the Holocaust. And now, finally, there was a place for the Jew that they could had to have some feeling of security. Now, it's interesting that the Rambam in discussing the miracle of Hanukkah and why we celebrate Hanukkah, he gives as the reason v'hemidu a melech min hakohanim v'chazra malchus Yisrael. The kingdom, the government of the land of Israel was returned to the Jewish people for over 200 years, till the time of the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. So in a sense, when we celebrate the victory of the Hashmonaim, we give thanks to God, not only for the victory itself, but the fact that for 200 years afterwards, those in charge of Eretz Yisrael, the political leadership, call it of Eretz Yisrael, identified with the Jewish people as being Jewish. And certainly, during that period of time, there were kings who were more distant from Torah than many of the leaders of the Zionist movement at the time of the establishment of the state. And when we focus that the celebration is not just on the past event that took place, but it's the perpetuation and the continuation of the Jewish nation in the state of Israel, we have to focus on the fact there were those who felt that if the Jews would not have revolted, if the Jews had not tried to establish their own government, that if not for the Zionist movement, the Arabs would have been living in peace with the Jewish people. And while people might have made that mistake at that time, when we see what the Arab nations are doing to each other, when one group of Muslims try to destroy other groups of Muslims, when Muslims cut the necks of Christians that reside in their midst, we can imagine what they would do to the Jewish people today. So if one could not recognize the salvation at that time, they certainly should be able to recognize the salvation today. But there is a challenge that the Yom Haatzmaut celebration does pose for us. And in the Parsha of Vayava Amalek, when Amalek attacked the Jewish people, the Torah tells us that Moshe told Yoshua, raise an army to attack Abchalonu Anoshim. The Chilta says that Moshe wanted to have people that were very God-fearing in the army. But they raised for us an army, and Moshe said him and Aaron and Hur were going up on top of the mountain to pray to God. And the Torah tells us, V'haya kasher yarim Moshe yado, when Moshe raised his hands in prayer, v'gova Yisrael, then the Jewish people were winning the war. But the kasher yarim Moshe yado, when Moshe lowered his hands, v'gova Amalek, then Amalek got the edge. And the question arises, I think I saw these questions in the Abarbanel many years ago. The Abarbanel raises the question, why did Moshe have to go on top of a mountain? Why, and on the contrary, from the Gemara in Brachos it appears, of course that's not the simple shot of the pasuk, Mimamakim krasicha Hashem, I call out to you, God, from the depths. And the Gemara, and also the question is, why did Moshe have to raise his hands in prayer? Prayer is done with the mouth and with the heart. Why here was it necessary for Moshe to raise his hands in prayer? And then, afterwards, Moshe Rabbeinu took built a mizbeach, built an altar, and he called it Hashem Nisi. Either God is my banner or God is my miracle. Why was all this necessary? And Moshe emphasized the point that when he raised his hand in prayer, he was holding the staff that he used in Egypt to bring the plagues against the Egyptians, which he used to split the sea. Why was that important? But I think the reason is that Milchemes Amalek represented a turn of events for the Jewish people. In Egypt, there were many miracles, but the Jewish people themselves played no role in the miracle. And even at the Yam, so Nachshon ben Aminadav, according to one Lashon in the Medrash, according to another Lashon in the Medrash, 12 people ran in and the sea split, but their role was very, very minor. Here, for the first time, the Jewish people would have to do something themselves. They would have to fight the war themselves. And there was this fear that when they fight the war themselves, they might say, it was my strength, my military strength, that made me victorious in the war against Amalek. So the Jewish people had to identify that which they did with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with God. So Moshe Rabbeinu had to go on top of the mountain and to raise his hands in prayer. The Jews who were fighting below the mountain would not be able to see Moshe Rabbeinu's lips in prayer. So they would identify their victory with Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer. Yes, we have to fight wars, unfortunately. But we have to know that the victory that we achieved was because of the prayers. It was because of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because of God. And I think that this is the challenge that Yom Haatzmaut presents. You know, Hanukkah, the hero of Hanukkah is the Hashmonayim. But we say in our tefillas, Raftas Rivam, Dantas Dinam, Nakamtas Makmasam, Masarti Gibram Yad Chalashim, Bram Yad Matan. Yes, the Hashmonayim fought against all odds. But the one who gave them the victory was HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the question here is, in a Yom Haatzmaut celebration, who are we giving the credit to? And believe me, we have to give credit to the soldiers of the Israeli army. There's no question about that. But when we talk about a Jewish holiday is celebrated because of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu helped us accomplish. And I think that many might have been hesitant to understand the significance of Yom Haatzmaut, because they thought that in a sense it pushes HaKadosh Baruch Hu aside. Now, one has to ask, why is it that soldiers, the early Chalutzim, who came to Eretz Yisrael, who toiled, and they had to deal with Arabs attacking them also in the early Yeshuvim, and most of them were not observant. Why did they go to Eretz Yisrael? Sure, the conditions were not good where they were. But at that time, many of them could have still gone to the United States. They could have gone somewhere else. Obviously, there was some identification with the Jewish people. Even though
I think we're having a hiccup here right now.
Question, there was a certain area where the Muslims were very intolerant. It was a, so to say, a taste of what was to come. And they called in the Jewish leaders and they told them, your Mashiach has not come yet. So you have to say, you each have to make a pronouncement. Allah is God, and Muhammad is his prophet. And anybody that doesn't do that, and he stays in the country, would be killed. And there were people who said that people should sacrifice their lives. It goes without saying that publicly they couldn't observe any mitzvahs, but privately they were able to observe perhaps not all the mitzvahs, but many of the mitzvahs. And there were those who came out with statements that one has to sacrifice their life. And the Rambam sent a letter of chizuk, of support to the people there. But at the end, he writes that anybody that has the opportunity, he says, I give you advice. And he says, this is advice that I give myself and I give to those that are close to me. And the advice is that if you have the opportunity, you have to leave that area. And he mentions a pasuk that David HaMelech said when David HaMelech was forced to leave Eretz Yisrael, Gershuni hayom istapeach benachlas Hashem leimor leichaboda lehim acherim. Because they have driven me out this day so that I cannot attach myself on the inheritance of the Lord, saying, go serve other gods. And he says from here, from this pasuk we see, from this verse we see, that if a Jew is in a place where he does not have, where they do not allow him to serve God, and he has an opportunity to serve God, he should leave the place if he has that ability. And he says, and one who doesn't use that opportunity, it's like he serves idols. And the question is, the Gemara in Ksuvas and the Rambam paskins this up in Hilchos Malachim. It uses the same pasuk to tell me a different halacha. The halacha is that if somebody leaves the land of Israel, it's as if, it doesn't mean literally, but it's as if he serves idols. And the Gemara says that a person, la'olam yadur, and the Rambam mentions it, la'olam yadur adam beret Yisrael afilu bir sheru ba'akum. A person has to live in the land of Israel. It's preferable to live in the land of Israel, even in a city that is mostly idol worshippers. Instead of living outside of the land of Israel, even in a city where it's mostly Jewish people. And when the Rambam talked about Jewish people, he was talking there, it seems from the context, Jewish people who are committed to Torah. That means, according to the Rambam, it's an amazing thing. I mean, perhaps it's not that extreme, but if you have a choice, living in a city in Israel, which mostly Arabs, but there are a few Jews there, or living in Williamsburg or Borough Park or Lakewood or Muncie, you should live in the city in Eretz Yisrael, which is mostly Arabs. So, on one hand, the Rambam uses this pasuk in the Igros to say that a person has to live in a city where there is an environment that is conducive to observance of Torah. On the other hand, he uses the same pasuk to paskin that a person should not leave Eretz Yisrael, even if he's in an area that is mostly not Jewish, mostly people who worship idols. It seems to be a contradiction. How are we to understand this? But I think when a person lives in an area, he is not only affected by the people who are his neighbors, but he is also affected by the culture, which is part of the heritage of the place. In other words, in the United States, it's not only what the people, of course, for the most part, it's what the people in whose midst we dwell that has the impact upon us. But even from the past generations, that impact is also, because their impact becomes part of the culture, part of the heritage of the place, that also has an impact upon us. And while this is true in every country, it's more true in Eretz Yisrael. And there are two major differences. One is, and matter of fact, this is true not only in positive attributes, but in negative attributes also. In this week's Sedra, the Torah tells us, the Torah warns us against imitating the ways of the people of Canaan. In other words, even though to a large degree Canaan was wiped out, but to a certain degree their impact was still there. But regarding the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, even when there's an absence of thousands of 1,800 years or 1,900 years, that impact is still there. In another country, if the people that reside there would leave and another people come for a certain amount of time, in a short amount of time, the past impact is nil. But in Eretz Yisrael, even though we were gone for a long time, when we return, the impact is still there. But not only that, in Eretz Yisrael, the heritage that we live with is not only the heritage of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael. It's not only the heritage of David HaMelech and Shlomo and Ezra, but it's included in it is the heritage of the Jewish people who resided outside of Eretz Yisrael during Golus, during our exile. Somehow, that is also part of the heritage of Eretz Yisrael. I think the fact that the Chalutzim came to Eretz Yisrael to build up the land, to be involved in establishing a Jewish community when they had the ability to go to other places, is indicative of the fact that they felt a certain tie to the Jewish heritage of the past. It might have been an unconscious heritage. My father would say, songs have a tune and songs have words. There are Jews that know the tune and know the words also. But there are Jews that only know the tune. They're not sure, they can't say exactly what it is. And they might say things that go against the words, but the tune they know. And the Jews, these early Chalutzim, who came to Eretz Yisrael, when they had the ability to go to other places, while they might not have known the words of the song, they couldn't specify what it is. They couldn't tell you the words of the heritage, but the tune of the heritage they had. Now, everybody knows the dispute that's going on in Eretz Yisrael today about the drafting of yeshiva boys. I don't want to get into that shaila now. It's not that I'm scared to discuss it. I probably will discuss it in a future shir. But I don't want the shir to go too long. So and let's assume that there is a good reason for certain yeshiva boys, and perhaps all the yeshiva boys, I'm not getting into the discussion right now, to sit and learn and to devote themselves full time to the service of God, where they really do it. Nevertheless, I think there's a certain responsibility on the Torah community to recognize the service that these soldiers are doing, and I should add that those yeshiva boys who do serve in the army are creating a great Kiddush Hashem. But those who do not serve, they should recognize that these soldiers, some of who are observant and some who are not yet observant, are saving their lives. There is this strange attitude that yeshiva boys have, that there's a strange attitude that yeshiva boys have. I don't need the protection. And they vilify those who protect them. It's very interesting. At one time, Reb Zevin wrote a response, and Reb Zevin was against, I think, drafting the yeshiva boys. But he wrote a response about this attitude, that the yeshiva boys don't need the protection. And he says, what about in 1929? He wrote this early. What about 1929, when the boys in Hebron Yeshiva in the city of Hebron were massacred? Did they not need protection? And we could ask the same question. I heard all kinds of stupid answers. What about Harnof? A few years ago, people were sitting and learning. People who had tremendous Yiras Shamayim, whose lives were dedicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and sincerely. I'm not talking about those who just say that they're dedicating their lives to Torah. Sincerely. And they were massacred. Obviously, everybody needs protection. So there should be an inyan of Hakaras HaTov, recognizing what these soldiers, whether it's the Hesder soldiers or the soldiers who are not observant, are doing for them. It wasn't too long ago that yeshivas would make it as their guest of honor people who contributed money to the yeshiva, irregardless of what their behavior was outside of giving tzedakah. But there was Hakaras HaTov. But for those fighting in the Israeli army, that are fighting to save the lives of all Jews in Eretz Yisrael, somehow that Hakaras HaTov is lacking. And, Chazal tell us that the first three makos, Dam, Tzfardeya, and Kinim, the water turning to blood, Moshe couldn't do it. Why? Because the waters of Egypt saved Moshe when he was a baby. He had to have Hakaras HaTov. The plague of frogs was also against the bodies of water in Egypt. So Aaron had to use the stick. And Kenan was from the sand. And that also, Moshe used the ground to hide the Egyptian who he killed. So there was an Indian Hakaras HaTov. Hakaras HaTov, to inanimate objects. How do we understand it? It doesn't make sense. An object played a role in doing me a favor. So I have to show favor to that object. But the answer is, we have a tendency to not want to recognize our debt, to not want to recognize that something was done for us. when we do not recognize what the agent did, we do not recognize what the Mashalach, the one who sent the agent, did for us. We have to realize that the soldiers in the Israeli army, they are the shlichim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They are the ones who assumed that mission to protect the Jewish people. And I think because there is a tendency among many in the yeshiva movement to vilify them. Because of that, they realize what they're doing. And when we refuse to recognize them as the shlichim of God, as the agents of God, so they, as a result of that, also get that attitude that they are not the agents of God. And because they have that attitude that they're not the agents of God, they don't see that connection between God and themselves and what they're doing. In order that if Moshe, Aaron, and Hur went to the top of the mountain at that time, and the soldiers did not fight, and the other Jews did not fight, Amalek would have been victorious also. In Egypt, it wasn't that way. But that's what the situation was. Yes, we need our Moshe, Aaron, and Hur to stand on top of the mountain. But we have to make sure that the soldiers recognize the connection. And if Moshe, Aaron, and Hur, those who play the role, I should say, Chas v'Shalom, those who see themselves as acting as the successors of the job of Moshe, Aaron, and Hur, do not recognize the connection between their prayers and what the soldiers are doing, between their Torah learning and what the soldiers are doing for them, then we can't expect them to recognize what the Torah world is doing for them. We have to realize this is what Yom Haatzmaut is about. Yom Haatzmaut cannot be a celebration. We have to, of course, we have to show Hakaras Hatov. We have to show Hakaras Hatov to the soldiers in the Israeli army, to those who are giving their lives. And when they're giving their lives, you should know they're not just giving their lives on behalf of the people that live in Eretz Yisrael, because what happens in Eretz Yisrael has an impact, a universal impact on the Jewish people everywhere. And we have to have a Hakaras Hatov not just one day. But the idea of Jewish holidays, is to give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to give thanks to God. And the only way we will get the Rav Goren, who really established whatever religious foundation there is in the Israeli army. He's the one that established it. He introduced kashrus. And he was very much involved in initiating the religious observance of Yom Haatzmaut. I read a book, I think it was a biography, that he wrote, and he said there that he feels he made one mistake. When Yom Haatzmaut falls out in Shabbos, so Yom Haatzmaut is postponed to another day. And we understand the reason for it. The reason for it is because with all the parades and everything else, it will lead to Chilul Shabbos, to desecration of Shabbos. And he at that time suggested that in those years, Yom Haatzmaut be observed on a different day. And he says he regrets that decision. He says what it should have been is the religious observance, the ritualistic observance. That should have been on Shabbos. He says the parades and all that should have been on the weekdays. He says making the ritual observance dependent upon the parades, minimize the religious nature of Yom Haatzmaut. I think it's our responsibility to make sure that religious nature of Yom Haatzmaut be restored. I want to add, this now, unfortunately, we're all stuck in our houses. It might be a good idea. We're stuck in the house. Many people have a special meal on Yom Haatzmaut. Many people don't, even those who are Zionistically oriented. It's not Shabbos. Not everybody has. There is a machlokas even on Hanukkah, whether there's a special mitzvah of Suda or not. But this year, we're stuck in the houses. The children are stuck in the houses. It wouldn't be such a bad idea to have a special Suda. And we can talk about the Shaliach, but we have to make sure that the main thing is talk about the Meshaleach, that it was HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was Rabbi B'yad Ma'atim. And the establishment of the state was a miracle. Not only then, it's a miracle today. And it was a miracle because it really, if you want, a day that represented the end of the Holocaust, that offered opportunities for those that were in DP camps to leave. It was Yom Haatzmaut. It's Chasdei Hashem. One does not have to be a member of a Zionist organization to understand the significance of Yom Haatzmaut. I once discussed, there were a number of people who identified with the yeshiva world who davened in my shul. And I said to them, we were talking about Yom Haatzmaut, and I said to them, imagine today, all these yeshivas that you have in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim and Bnei Brak, would be good if there'd be many in other cities as well. Imagine today, even in the United States, would you be able to have the same type of yeshivas? If not for the establishment of the state of Israel, you wouldn't have been able to have all these yeshivas. So everybody has to recognize the significance of Yom Haatzmaut, but it's our responsibility to make sure that the world recognizes not just the Shaliach, but the Meshaleach also. Not just the agent, but the one who sent the agent. The one who, the Shomer Yisrael, and who was Shomer Sheres Yisrael. And hopefully there's an argument as to whether the establishment of the state of Israel is a schal to the Gula, or it's not a schal to the Gula. Is it the beginning of the redemption, or it's not the beginning of the redemption? But my father said, when he was asked that question, he says, it could be potentially the beginning of the redemption. It's it's an opportunity to begin the process of Gula. And it's only if we're able to somehow identify the victories of the Jews in Eretz Yisrael as nisim given by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Aschal to the Gula will lead to the Gula Shlema. Okay. All right, dear.
Okay, so thank you. So if people have questions,
Sure.
please put it in the chat, and I will ask them.
If it's done as part of a Israeli celebration, first of all, I'm not sure that you're not allowed to listen to music in general. That's the first thing. So if it's not in a public setting, if it's in a private setting, you could listen to music. But it seems to me that if it's done as part of a Yom Haatzmaut celebration, especially if it's done as part of a Sudas mitzvah, if you're going to have a meal and it's done as part of a Sudas mitzvah, then it would certainly be allowed. But if it's just a person wants to use the excuse to listen to rock and roll, so then it's not allowed.
Thank you. Okay, someone has a hand raised, but I need you to type it in the chat, please. Someone asked about getting a haircut on Yom Haatzmaut.
Rabbi Nissen, the second Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, he wrote an article where he was matir it. I would differ from him because to a large degree, a lot of what he wrote is when people have private simchas and let's say bris, he brought down when there's a bris, the halacha is the father can take a haircut. But here you would be getting rid of, it's where it's one individual, it's one thing, but not something that will negate svira continuously. No, you need 33 days of avelus. So it seems to me that if it's taking a haircut, would be getting rid of the minhag completely. And I don't think people are taking haircuts in honor of the state of Israel. If it would be something that somehow might be done in honor of the day, okay, but we could say the music at the meal, that's fine. But I don't see that the taking of the haircut itself will be in honor of the celebration of the Ness of Yom Haatzmaut.
And whatever you say about haircut applies to shaving also, right?
Well, shaving, there are many more kulas, many other leniencies. So a person can shave. There's more room to be matir shaving, to allow for shaving.
Okay, someone's asked if there are any major gedolim who are originally opposed to celebrating Yom Haatzmaut. If originally opposed to celebrating Yom Haatzmaut, but have now changed and are in favor of it.
I'm not aware that anybody changed their attitude in that direction. So I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
Of any. I really don't keep a scorecard on that. I don't know.
Okay. Thank you.
Then we have to determine who's the gadol also. So,
right.
so that would be another question.
Okay, so I don't see any other questions up here. So thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Rabbi, for the share.
Okay, thank you.